The collapse of Israel, once unthinkable, is now not only possible, but imminent. After the Palestinian resistance exposed Israel's impenetrable security as all hype on October 7th of last year, Israel responded by carpet-bombing Gaza and putting it under total siege, committing unspeakable war crimes in the process. And as they commit this genocide on one front, they are invading on another, taxing a weary occupation force that's already spread thin. This violent chaos is being fueled by a desperate expansionist ideology attempting to maintain a rusting iron grip on power and Palestine. Let's speak plainly. Israel is going to collapse as a direct consequence of their actions since October 7th. The genocide has been simmering in the background for decades, but Israel's fanatical bloodlust in the last year has turned the entire world, with the notable exception of a handful of Western powers, against them. We could see the cracks begin to form when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu dissolved the war cabinet after Benny Gantz resigned in protest over the handling of the genocide. Gantz's departure left Netanyahu surrounded with ultra-nationalist yes-men, who are staunchly opposed to a ceasefire and instead favor creating Greater Israel. The resignation may not threaten Netanyahu's hold on power, but it has drastically divided Israeli society during a very tense and violent time. Adding to Netanyahu's troubles, Israel's largest labor union declared a general strike sparked by the regime's failure to meaningfully address the hostage situation in Gaza. The resulting strike shut down schools, businesses, and essential services throughout Israel. Following, but unrelated to the strike, tens of thousands of citizens took to the streets demanding an end to all military operations and for Netanyahu to resign. The Israeli regime has become so desperate that they have ordered the conscription of ultra-Orthodox Jews, a group historically exempt from service. The armed forces are eager to replenish their dwindling ranks with some of the 63,000 ultra-Orthodox men now eligible, and let's say, strongly encouraged to serve. But Israel has always had a robust economy, so they'll be fine, right? Well, no. It actually looks pretty grim. Local institutions have already moved $40 billion to foreign accounts because it turns out genocide and starting regional wars creates instability. Who could have guessed? Right now, those in the know include major investment funds and insurance companies, who are currently the key drivers of this capital flight as they seek to avoid further exposure to the collapsing economy, and because missile attack insurance policy is extremely expensive. Other international investors, such as Denmark's pension fund, which manages 42 billion euros, divested from 4 Israeli banks financing illegal settlements. This was followed by Norway's KLP, selling its $69 million stake in Caterpillar because of the company's role in aiding the genocide. The divestment movement is gaining traction internationally, further eroding Israel's economy. Israel's shekel has also been in continuous decline since the escalation of the ethnic cleansing campaign. Additionally, both Moody's and Fitch Ratings downgraded Israel's credit rating twice, causing Israel's borrowing costs to explode. Now the regime must balance financing a genocide, war in Lebanon, and a floundering economy. Finally, the Central Bank of Israel has estimated that military spending will reach $70 billion by 2025, driving the country's debt-to-GDP ratio to 67%, which will require severe austerity measures to avoid financial crisis. They are financing their violence with a currency constantly losing value. You don't need to be an economist to realize this is completely unsustainable. The port of Eilat, Israel's Red Sea port and one of its most important trade logistics centers, declared bankruptcy after 8 months of inactivity following the Houthi blockade. 40,000 businesses have closed within Israel, and up to 60,000 are expected to have closed by the end of the year. These are numbers not seen since the global economic shutdown following the COVID pandemic. And it isn't just money that's fleeing Israel. Israelis are too. Ironic, considering the often repeated line that Israel is the safest place on earth for Jews, which is the most load-bearing excuse given for its existence. In 2023, Israel had a net migration loss of 55,300 people, according to data from the Population and Immigration Authority. They go on to say that current data indicates the total will be near 70,000 for 2024. Probably because people don't want intermittent showers of Iranian missiles in their weather reports. Jokes in poor taste aside, some viewers may not be aware that of the people that have emigrated to Israel since the Nakba in 1948, 43% of them, 1.4 million people, arrived after 1990. This means that over 15% of Israelis have some clear and living connection to another, likely safer country. And that's not all. Many of these settlers have had children born in Israel who also have, via their parents, citizenship rights and claims in their parents' nation of origin, adding hundreds of thousands of people to that total. A huge portion of the population that has the option to leave. And it seems like they are. Poll data released in July shows that more flight is highly likely since a full quarter of Israelis, that's 2.3 million people, would immediately emigrate if given a quote, practical opportunity to do so. Based on this data, we can reasonably assume a plurality, if not most, of that 2.3 million includes plenty of this 15% and their children. It would appear that settlers don't like dealing with the consequences of their actions. Israelis are having to abandon their ethno-state as a direct result of its fascist and genocidal behavior. On October 7th, the PRF exposed the massive holes in Israel's expensive and supposedly impenetrable defense apparatus, making a mockery of the racist and violent infrastructure. The shockwaves from this unprecedented success forced the unprepared Israeli regime to establish buffer zones in Gaza, a desperate attempt to prevent similar failures in the future. Up north near the Lebanese border, over 100,000 settlers fled their illegal settlements with the IOF assisting their evacuation. This has effectively created another buffer zone, but within its own colonial borders. The first time such defensive measures have been implemented. The colonial regime is unable to guarantee settlers' safety due to Hezbollah targeting military installations, such as Iron Dome batteries, located in and around those settlements. Israeli military leaders have since been forced to admit the severe limitations of the Iron Dome. An IOF retreat of this magnitude hasn't been seen in the north of the colony since the Yom Kippur War. The resistance's growing capabilities have repeatedly overwhelmed Israel's paper tiger defenses. After suffering heavy losses and repeated failures on the ground, the IOF has been forced to abandon their familiar tactics both in Gaza and against Hezbollah. For now, we'll focus on the latter. Hezbollah's tunnel network and fortified positions are proving that Israel's ground strategy is a disaster, which is also true in Gaza, where similar tactics have proven too much for the IOF. So now they're replacing ground troops with more indiscriminate airstrikes, desperately hoping to regain some control. Unfortunately, the Israeli Air Force has been unable to hit meaningful military targets like rocket launchers, perhaps something to do with their preference for targeting civilian populations. This mirrors Gaza's situation, as Israel's airstrikes have failed to stop rocket fire from Gaza's resistance forces. In short, Israel's reliance on ultimately ineffective air power is a sign of desperation. Another typical tactic, at least for the IOF, is the use of corridors, in particular the Netzarim and Philadelphia corridors, which have become critical for Israeli troops to get in and out of direct conflict zones while still maintaining significant presence. These corridors basically function as forts, heavily fortified routes enabling movement of troops and supplies without exposing them to the bold and effective Palestinian resistance. The Philadelphia corridor on the Gaza-Egyptian border is a more aggressive, hands-on way of enforcing the blockade on Gaza and hermetically sealing it off from the outside world. The Netzarim corridor serves a different purpose, allowing for the movement of troops and supplies in and out of Gaza. They also use it to carry out raids and other terrorist attacks, after which they return to the safety of the corridor. These corridors are utilized because Israel doesn't have enough active duty troops at any one time to maintain control of Gaza the way a conventional military would. Of course, another part of this is their over-reliance on airstrikes. Even Israel doesn't want to blow up too many of its own. But the weakness of Israel's military goes far deeper. Their reputation for being an absolutely dominant force in the region is a fantasy. In reality, Israeli soldiers have been remarkably ineffective, as evidenced by the continued presence of the PRF forces in Gaza in places claimed to have been cleared. The visible cracks in the Iron Dome in the north are just as evident in Gaza, where it has struggled to handle the frequent barrages of rockets from the PRF. Now, critical infrastructure and Israeli citizens are more exposed than ever. It would appear that the Iron Dome is beginning to buckle under an increasing number of rocket and missile salvos. On the ground, the IOF has faced even harsher realities. Urban warfare in Gaza has proven catastrophic, with entire units suffering near total losses. The PRF have used tunnels, dense urban environments, and fortified positions to neutralize Israeli ground assaults, forcing the IOF to fight in conditions that negate much of their technological edge. Even Israel's overwhelming air power has failed to weaken the Palestinian resistance forces, leaving Israel's military scrambling for solutions. In fact, their own carpet bombing has made it hard for troops and equipment to maneuver and navigate. The IOF coined the term devastated terrain warfare, and are now having to train their soldiers how to fight in the mess they caused. As evidenced by countless resistance highlight reels, they're not doing a good job. Speaking of messes caused by the IOF, let's talk about their mounting casualties. The best data currently available puts it at more than 1,200 soldiers killed and over 5,000 injured. Numbers unseen since the Yom Kippur War. These numbers are out of date, especially with the invasion of Lebanon, but reliable information about the IOF's casualties is hard to come by, since they often lie or don't even report the numbers. In addition to the large number of casualties, the IOF has been bleeding equipment too, and the scale is staggering. 41 tanks, including the much-touted Merkava models, have been destroyed, damaged, or captured. 160 armored vehicles destroyed or disabled. 24 troop carriers were captured on October 7th alone. 17 drones have been lost. 7 destroyed, 2 damaged, and 8 captured. 66 multiple rocket launchers have been either destroyed or captured, leaving Israel increasingly vulnerable. And these numbers are the, quote, official ones, meaning very likely a severe undercount. Cross-referencing battle footage, leaked information about vehicle repair, testimony from Israeli hospitals, and so on indicates that everything from the number of Israeli soldiers dead and injured to destroyed or damaged equipment is several times higher. Additionally, Israel's highly prized surveillance infrastructure has been laid to waste. Resistance forces have damaged or destroyed observation balloons and surveillance towers, which will limit Israel's ability to gather intelligence. Hezbollah has also struck critical blows against Israel's crumbling military. The group has worked swiftly to improve their tactics and weaponry to counter Israel's defense systems and to prepare for the invasion they knew would come, and now has. They've been fighting in solidarity with the PRF since October 8th, but only really pulled off the kid gloves in recent weeks. In the process, Hezbollah have shown off their updated capabilities and new weapons that can fly farther, hit harder, and do so with a level of precision that has left Israel scrambling. In fact, John Elmer over at the Electronic Intifada has been documenting some pretty incredible successes, such as a drone being sent to take out a jammer meant to make the very drone used for this mission inoperable and drop out of the sky. It should be noted that this drone was a so-called suicide drone, which means Hezbollah was able to stream video footage back to the base. Otherwise, we wouldn't be seeing this, as Israel certainly wouldn't report the humiliation. Speaking of drones, their improvements and sophistication don't stop there. Besides the one that targets jammers, their drones have successfully targeted other critical Israeli military infrastructure as well, including radar systems, Iron Dome batteries, and communication hubs. On the ground, Hezbollah has been outmaneuvering Israeli forces, inflicting high casualties and halting the IOF at every encounter. Fighters operate from fortified bunkers and fire well-hidden mobile missile launchers that Israel, with all its gadgets and gizmos, cannot find or destroy. This allows Hezbollah to maintain a steady barrage of rocket attacks, striking deep into Israeli territory, and overwhelming its defense systems. While Israel is increasingly outmatched on its active battlefronts in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon, Ansar Allah, commonly referred to as the Houthis, operating from Yemen, have, with remarkable success, disrupted trade routes in both the Red Sea and the Mediterranean by targeting ships bound for, doing business with, or otherwise associated with Israel. This includes ally shipping like that of the US. And even though Israel will never admit it, this has had a severe effect on its already flailing economy. Ansar Allah also claims to possess missiles capable of hypersonic speeds, a claim which has yet to be verified. But what is undeniable is, hypersonic or not, they have proven to be a serious threat to Israel. One of their Palestine II missiles was launched successfully into Israel and impacted near Ben Gurion Airport some 2,000 kilometers away. This marked the first time the group has successfully struck Israel. The strike demonstrates that not only is Israel not safe from Iranian missiles, they can't even reliably defend against a desperately underfunded group of resistance fighters from one of the poorest nations on Earth. This marks the opening of yet another front Israel needs to monitor, taxing their strained resources even further. Israel's invasion of Lebanon is just the beginning of the expansionist ambitions of the Greater Israel Project, aka Lebensraum. In short, it's the belief that Israel's borders should extend from the Sinai to the Euphrates. This latest invasion follows 2 Israeli terrorist attacks on Lebanon, which resulted in at least 42 deaths and over 3,500 injuries, as well as the assassination of Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah. Since Israel is unable to achieve meaningful strategic or even tactical victories, it relies on bombing civilian centers as punishment, as well as messy assassinations of leaders. These killings target organizations born out of earlier guerrilla struggles against Israel, and despite Israeli assassinations going back decades, these groups have only gotten more competent, more experienced, and more dangerous, as most clearly illustrated by Hezbollah. Israeli soldiers have encountered stiff resistance from Hezbollah forces. In one town, along 2 kilometers of the Lebanese border, Hezbollah fighters successfully repelled Israeli infantry after an intense hour-long battle. They were able to destroy 3 Merkava tanks with rockets as Israeli forces tried to advance towards the town. The IOF later attempted a second breach of Hezbollah's defenses, which also ended with them retreating. Hezbollah also saw success near the village of Yarun, where forces ambushed an Israeli unit with explosives, resulting in an unspecified number of casualties, and which stopped the IOF from encircling the village. The occupation forces have begrudgingly confirmed that 8 soldiers were killed in their failed operations in Lebanon. In addition to those 8, 7 other Israeli soldiers were wounded. While these numbers may not seem like much, they mark a significant loss due to the small size of the Israeli units. What's more, it's important to note that Israel has imposed heavy military censorship on the northern front, and if past trends are any indication, the actual number of casualties and other losses are much greater. Israel's actions in Gaza have triggered an unprecedented shift in world opinion regarding the legitimacy of the colonial ethno-state. Bolivia, Chile, and Honduras have either severed or suspended relations, rightly accusing Israel of committing crimes against humanity. Even Colombia, a US ally, condemned their actions as genocidal and cut ties. A UN resolution backed by 124 countries demanding Israel end the occupation of Palestine has, so far, been the strongest official global opposition to the genocide. Notably opposed, of course, is the United States. Mainstream outlets like CNN and BBC have started to become more critical, or at least air more critical views, focusing on the humanitarian crisis and Palestinian casualties. Social media and its young user base have shown everyone the horrors happening in Palestine, and some of that video evidence is coming directly from the sadistic and giddy perpetrators themselves. All of these are factors which are causing a historic collapse of one of the world's most effective PR campaigns. The numbers don't lie. Only 41% of Americans aged 18 to 29 view Israel positively. Only 24% favor its fascist regime, and only 38% believe Israel's justification for committing genocide. This has resulted in a situation where total diplomatic isolation can only be staved off by its relationship with the United States government. As all American taxpayers are aware, Israel's military leans hard on the US for its survival, a weight the US will find heavier and harder to bear as time passes. Between 2019 and 2023, 69% of Israel's major arms imports and 78% of total arms came directly from the US. What's more, every year, the US injects $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel, $500 million of which is earmarked just for missile defense systems, which apparently don't even work. After October 7th, the US immediately shipped thousands of precision-guided bombs and missiles which went on to kill thousands of children. But wouldn't you know it, that still wasn't enough. $106 million in tank ammunition, $147 million in artillery components, and over 100 other military categories, including bunker busters, were delivered in subsequent shipments. The US even sent the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, fighter jets, and missile defense systems to help Israel defend itself into other countries. It seems the US and Israel share the same definition of self-defense. Israel's intense genocidal campaign in Gaza, coupled with its expansionist war in Lebanon, has thrown the regime into a death spiral from which it will not escape. Diplomatic isolation, a drastically weakened military, a crumbling economy, a fleeing populace, and total dependence on the US are rapidly contributing to Israel's demise. The Palestinian resistance forces have proven that Israel's invincibility is a myth, and has exposed its explicitly fascist ambitions to the world. The tide is slowly turning, and resistance to Israel is growing stronger every day. The Israeli apartheid regime mistakenly believes burying tens of thousands of Palestinians is cleansing the land. In reality, they are planting the seeds of their own destruction. It's important to remember that many of the events discussed in this episode are still developing, and by the time this video is released, things may look very different. While writing the script for this video, the Qassam brigades executed a bold operation inside Israel that killed 7, shortly followed by Iran launching 200 missiles which successfully hit bases around Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, Israel continued its bombing of Beirut and Syria. Finally, 99 American doctors released a letter to the Biden-Harris regime begging for an end to the US support for Israel's genocide. We've linked the letter below, but be advised it is extremely graphic. As always, you can find our citations in the description. First Thought will continue to monitor the situation as it develops.